A 9-year-old girl climbed into a treehouse everyone said was cursed, and what she found hidden inside the hollow oak tree would turn a $280 million secret into the discovery of a lifetime. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The town of Millbrook, Oregon didn't show up on most maps. Population 3,217 if you counted the Hendersons' new baby and old Mr. Fisher, who insisted he still lived there even though he'd moved to a nursing home in Portland 5 years ago. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, your business, and probably what you had for dinner last Tuesday. Where the biggest excitement came from the annual pie contest at the county fair, and the only traffic jam happened when Chester Rawlings cattle got loose on Main Street every few months like clockwork. Emma Davies was 9 years old, small for her age, with wild auburn hair that refused to stay in braids no matter how hard her grandmother tried. She had freckles scattered across her nose like someone had flicked a paintbrush at her face, and eyes the color of moss after rain. She'd lived with her grandmother Rose for the past 2 years, ever since her parents died in a car accident on Highway 26 during a winter storm. The kind of tragedy that made people whisper and look away when you walked into the grocery store. The kind that left a hollow space in your chest that never quite filled back up. Rose Davies worked the morning shift at Millie's Diner, the only restaurant in town that stayed open past 8. She'd wake up at 4:30 every morning, her joints creaking louder than the floorboards, and shuffle to the bathroom to put herself together. By 5:15 she'd be out the door, leaving Emma still asleep in the small bedroom with the faded yellow wallpaper and the window that looked out over the backyard, over the enormous oak tree. The tree was old, older than the house, older than anyone in Millbrook could remember. Its trunk was so wide it would take 4 grown men holding hands to circle it. The branches stretched out like arms reaching for the sky, thick and gnarled, covered in moss that made them look ancient and wise. And about 20 feet up, nestled in the crook where 3 massive limbs met, sat a treehouse. It wasn't the kind of treehouse you'd see in magazines or home improvement shows. It wasn't cute or Pinterest-worthy. It was weathered grey wood, the color of storm clouds, with a shingled roof that had seen better decades. The windows were intact but filthy, and a small porch wrapped around the front with a railing that leaned slightly to the left. A rope ladder hung down from the entrance, swaying gently in the breeze even when there wasn't any wind. Some of the rungs looked rotten, others looked brand new, which was strange because no one had been up there in years. Everyone in town had a story about the treehouse. Mrs. Patterson from the post office said it was built by a recluse named Marcus, who disappeared in 1984 without a trace. Sheriff Coleman claimed he'd investigated the property back then, found nothing suspicious, but still got a bad feeling every time he drove past. The teenagers said it was haunted, that if you climbed up there at midnight, you could hear whispers. That Marcus's ghost was still up there, protecting something. Emma's grandmother had been crystal clear from the day Emma moved in. "You stay away from that treehouse, you hear me? That thing's not safe. The wood's rotten, the ladder's falling apart, and I'm not having you break your neck because you got curious." Emma had nodded, promised, crossed her heart. But that didn't stop her from staring at it. From her bedroom window she could see it perfectly. At night, when she couldn't sleep, when the grief sat heavy on her chest like a stone, she'd watch the treehouse silhouette against the stars and wonder what it would be like to climb that high. To be alone in the sky, away from pitying looks and whispered conversations that stopped when she walked into a room. School was lonely. The other kids didn't know what to say to her anymore. Her best friend Lily had moved to Seattle over the summer, and the rest of the 4th graders treated her like she might shatter if they spoke too loud. She'd eat lunch alone, do her homework alone, walk home alone. Her grandmother loved her fiercely, but Rose was tired, worn down by double shifts and medical bills and trying to keep their small house from falling apart. There wasn't much energy left for anything else. So Emma spent a lot of time in the backyard, reading books under the oak tree, talking to the stray cat that came around sometimes, a grey tabby she'd named Professor because he looked distinguished. She'd sit with her back against the massive trunk and tilt her head up, tracing the path from ground to treehouse, counting the branches she'd use like steps if she ever got brave enough to disobey. It was a Tuesday in late September when everything changed. The morning had started like every other. Rose kissed Emma's forehead before dawn, reminded her to eat breakfast and lock the door, and headed to the diner. Emma got herself ready for school, walked the 6 blocks to Millbrook Elementary, sat through classes where she heard nothing, and walked back home by 3:15. The house was quiet. It always was. Emma dropped her backpack by the door, grabbed an apple from the kitchen, and wandered into the backyard. The afternoon sun filtered through the oak's canopy, creating patterns of light and shadow on the grass. Professor was there, curled up in his favorite sunny spot. Emma sat beside him, scratching behind his ears. That's when she noticed something different. One of the rope ladder's rungs was moving, swaying like someone had just stepped off it. But there was no wind. The air was completely still. Emma stood up slowly, her heart picking up speed. She walked closer to the base of the tree, craning her neck to look up. The treehouse sat there, silent and waiting, the way it always did. But something felt different today. Something felt like an invitation. She thought about her grandmother's warning, thought about the stories, the danger, the very real possibility that the wood was rotten and she'd fall and break something. But she also thought about how small she felt in the world now, how invisible, how nothing she did seemed to matter anymore. And she thought maybe, just maybe, doing something brave would make her feel alive again. Emma reached for the rope ladder. The rope was rougher than she expected, thick and scratchy against her palms. She tested the first rung with her foot. It held. She pulled herself up, then reached for the next one. Her arms shook slightly, not from weakness but from adrenaline. She'd never been good at climbing, had always been the kid who stayed on the ground during recess while others scrambled up the jungle gym. But she kept going. One rung, then another. The ground fell away beneath her. 10 feet up, she made the mistake of looking down, and her stomach lurched. Professor sat below, watching her with what she swore was judgment in his yellow eyes. She forced herself to look up instead, focusing on the treehouse entrance just a few feet above her now. When her hand finally gripped the edge of the platform, she hauled herself up with a grunt that sounded too loud in the quiet afternoon. She lay there for a moment on the wooden deck, breathing hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then she sat up and looked around. The porch was bigger than it had seemed from the ground. The wood was weathered but solid under her weight. No creaking, no sense of rot. Strange, she thought. For something supposedly falling apart, it felt sturdy. The door to the treehouse interior was closed but not locked, just a simple latch that lifted easily under her thumb. She pushed the door open. It swung inward with a soft groan, and stale air rushed out, carrying the scent of old wood and dust and something else. Something like cinnamon and paper. Emma stepped inside. The interior was a single room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with a low ceiling that sloped where it met the tree's trunk. The trunk itself grew right through the center of the space, massive and solid, the bark rough and dark. Windows on 3 sides let in dusty streams of afternoon light. The floor was covered in a layer of grime and dead leaves that had blown in over the years, but beneath it she could see careful craftsmanship. Tongue and groove boards fitted perfectly. Built-in shelves lined 2 walls, empty now except for cobwebs and the desiccated remains of a wasp nest. But what caught Emma's attention were the walls themselves. Beneath the dust, beneath years of neglect, there were markings. She moved closer, using her sleeve to wipe away the grime. Letters, numbers, symbols. Some looked like coordinates, others like codes. There were sketches too, rough drawings of birds, of trees, of geometric patterns that seemed to repeat. In the corner, near the window that faced the house, someone had carved initials, M.W., and beneath them, a date, 1978. Emma traced the letters with her finger. Marcus, the man who'd disappeared. The man everyone said was strange, reclusive, maybe dangerous. But these carvings didn't feel dangerous. They felt lonely, like someone leaving messages for a friend who never came. She explored the rest of the space, running her hands along the shelves, peering into corners. Near the back wall, where the shadows were deepest, her foot caught on something. She looked down. The floorboard beneath her shoe was different from the others. While the rest were darkened with age, this one was lighter, newer, like it had been replaced. And it wasn't fitted quite right. There was a gap, just a sliver between it and the board next to it. Emma knelt down and ran her fingers along the edge. The board shifted slightly under her touch. Her pulse quickened. She worked her fingernails into the gap and pulled. The board resisted, then suddenly came loose with a soft pop. She set it aside and peered into the space below. At first, she thought it was just a small storage area, a hollow between the joists. But as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she realized the hollow went deeper than it should. Much deeper. She pulled out her phone, the hand-me-down flip phone her grandmother had given her for emergencies, and turned on its tiny flashlight. The beam illuminated rough wood, but not horizontal joists. Vertical planks, stairs. There were stairs going up, built inside the tree itself. Emma's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't possible. Trees were solid. You couldn't build stairs inside a living tree. But as she looked closer, she understood. The oak was hollow, eaten away at its core by time and decay. And someone, Marcus probably, had recognized the opportunity, had built a secret staircase inside the hollow trunk, leading up to something hidden in the branches above. Her hands were shaking now. This was beyond breaking a rule about climbing the treehouse. This was something else entirely. Something that felt big and important and maybe dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with rotten wood. Every rational part of her brain screamed to put the floorboard back, climb down the rope ladder, go inside the house, and pretend she'd never seen this. But Emma hadn't felt curious about anything in 2 years, hadn't felt that electric pull of mystery, that need to know. And it felt good. It felt like waking up after a long grey sleep. She looked at the stairs again, the way they spiraled up into darkness. Listened to the silence of the treehouse, broken only by the distant sound of a car passing on the street out front. Her grandmother wouldn't be home for 3 more hours. No one knew she was here. No one would know if she climbed a little higher, just to see. Emma took a breath, steadied herself, and lowered her feet onto the first step. It held her weight. The wood was solid, carefully cut, each step notched into the inner wall of the hollow trunk. She descended fully into the gap, then began to climb. The staircase was narrow, barely wide enough for her small frame. An adult would have struggled. The air grew cooler as she ascended, and the light from the treehouse below faded quickly. She used her phone's flashlight to see, the weak beam bouncing off bark and wood. The stairs spiraled up and up, following the curve of the tree's interior. She counted 20 steps, then 30, then lost count. Her legs burned. Her breath came faster. But she kept climbing because stopping now, trapped in this narrow shaft of wood and darkness, felt worse than pressing forward. And then, suddenly, the stairs ended. Above her was a ceiling, or what looked like one, but set into it was a hatch, the kind you'd see leading to an attic. It had a metal ring for a handle. Emma reached up and grasped the cold metal. She pulled. The hatch didn't budge. She braced her feet and pulled harder. Still nothing. Then she noticed the keyhole, small and brass, right next to the handle. Of course it was locked. Disappointment flooded through her, sharp and surprising in its intensity. She'd come all this way. She'd been brave. And now she was stuck in a tree with no idea what was up there. She sat down on the top step, the hatch just inches above her head, and fought back tears she didn't fully understand. That's when her phone's light caught something. A small carved space in the bark beside the stairs, like a little shelf. On it sat something wrapped in oilcloth, brown and stiff with age. Emma picked it up carefully. It weighed almost nothing. She unwrapped it slowly, the cloth cracking as it unfolded. Inside was a brass key. It was old, the metal tarnished green in places, but the teeth were sharp and precise. Emma held it up to the light, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was it. This was the moment. She could turn around, climb back down, put everything back the way it was. Tell her grandmother maybe. Let adults handle this. That would be the smart thing, the safe thing. But Emma had stopped feeling safe the night her parents died. Had stopped believing the world made sense or followed rules. So maybe it was time to stop pretending those things mattered. She stood up, inserted the key into the lock, and turned. The mechanism clicked, smooth and well-oiled despite decades of disuse. The hatch lifted easily when she pushed, swinging open on silent hinges. Light spilled down, not sunlight but something else, something artificial and steady. Emma climbed the last few steps and pulled herself up into a space that stole her breath and changed everything she thought she knew about the world. The attic was impossible. That was the first thing Emma understood. The second was that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure it stayed hidden. She stood slowly, her head clearing the hatch, and looked around in stunned silence. The space was roughly 12 feet by 12 feet, built into the uppermost branches of the oak where the limbs were thickest and strongest. But unlike the treehouse below, this room was pristine. The walls were lined with some kind of paneling that kept out moisture. The floor was solid, level, carpeted even, in a deep forest green that had somehow resisted fading. Soft LED strips ran along the ceiling's edges, powered by what looked like solar panels she could see through a small skylight above. The whole thing was temperature-controlled, she realized. There was a small dehumidifier humming quietly in one corner. But what filled the space made her forget about the engineering marvel. The room was packed with containers, clear plastic bins stacked carefully along the walls, each one labeled with neat handwriting. Archive-quality boxes sat on custom-built shelves. Glass display cases held items she couldn't quite make out from where she stood. Everything was organized with obsessive precision, like a museum storage room or a very particular person's life's work. Emma stepped fully into the attic, her shoes sinking slightly into the carpet. She moved to the nearest stack of containers and read the label, Comic Books, 1938 to 1945, mint condition. Her brow furrowed. Comic books? She'd expected treasure, maybe. Gold or jewels if her imagination had been running wild. But comic books. She lifted the lid of the container carefully. Inside, each comic was sealed in its own protective sleeve, separated by acid-free backing boards. She picked up the first one, her hands trembling slightly. The cover showed a man in a blue suit and red cape, flying above a city. Bold letters proclaimed, Action Comics, issue number 1, June 1938. She'd seen this before, she realized, in a book at the library about valuable collectibles. This was Superman's first appearance. The book had said only about 100 copies existed in the world. That one had sold for over $3 million. Her knees went weak. She set the comic down carefully and looked around the room with new eyes. If that was just one item, what else was here? She moved to another container. Rare coins, Morgan silver dollars. Inside, dozens of coins in individual cases, each one gleaming under the LED lights. Another box. Original animation cells. Disney, 1937 to 1955. She opened it to find hand-painted cells from Snow White, Pinocchio, Fantasia. Each one a piece of art that had been photographed frame by frame to create the movies she'd watched as a little kid. There were vintage toys still in their original packaging, never opened. Baseball cards from the 1950s and 60s, names she recognized from her grandfather's stories. Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron. Original movie posters, rolled carefully in archival tubes. First edition books, some so old the leather bindings had cracked despite the climate control. Emma moved through the space in a daze, opening containers, reading labels, trying to comprehend what she was seeing. Every item was documented, every piece was preserved with extraordinary care. This wasn't a hoarder's collection or random junk, this was curated, intentional, valuable beyond anything she could calculate. Near the back wall, she found a different kind of container. A wooden box, cedar maybe, with brass corners and a small lock. The key from downstairs fit perfectly. Inside, wrapped in silk cloth, was a leather journal. Emma lifted it out carefully. The leather was soft, well worn, the pages thick and cream-colored. She opened to the first page. The handwriting was the same as the labels, neat and precise, each letter formed with care. At the top of the page, property of Marcus Webb. Below that, if you're reading this, then I'm long gone, and you're brave enough to have found what I left behind. Emma sank down onto the carpet, the journal open in her lap, and began to read. The early entries were practical, documenting purchases and acquisitions. Marcus had started collecting in the 1960s, buying comics and toys and cards that nobody else wanted, spending money carefully saved from his job as an accountant. The entries showed a lonely man, someone who found joy in objects because people had proven disappointing. He wrote about going to estate sales, flea markets, garage sales, about recognizing value where others saw junk. But as the years progressed, the entries changed. Marcus had started to understand something. These items he loved, these pieces of culture that brought him happiness, they were becoming rare, valuable. He'd bought a Superman comic for 10 cents in 1965. By 1980, it was worth thousands. He'd purchased a Mickey Mantle rookie card for $2. Now, it was priceless. Emma flipped through the pages, reading faster now. Marcus had made a decision somewhere in the late 1970s. He would stop selling, would preserve everything, would create a collection that would survive him, protected and perfect, waiting for someone who would appreciate it the way he did. Someone who understood that these weren't just things. They were pieces of wonder, fragments of dreams, proof that imagination mattered. The final entries, dated in early 1984, were different, darker. Marcus had gotten sick. Cancer, he wrote, though he'd told no one. He had no family he trusted, no friends close enough to understand. The people in town thought him strange, maybe dangerous. He'd heard the rumors, knew they'd tear this place apart looking for valuables if they knew what was here. So he'd made a different choice. He'd hidden it, built the secret stairs, installed the hatch, created a puzzle that only someone curious and brave enough would solve. And he'd written one final instruction. This collection belongs to whoever finds it, not because of law or ownership, but because they were willing to climb into the unknown. They were willing to look up when everyone else looked away, to see possibility where others saw danger. Emma's vision blurred with tears. She thought about Marcus, alone in this space, carefully preserving wonders for someone he'd never meet. She thought about herself, climbing the forbidden tree because she'd felt small and invisible and needed to feel brave. She thought about the impossible worth of what surrounded her, millions of dollars, maybe hundreds of millions, hidden in a tree in a backyard in a town no one had heard of. And she realized her life had just changed in ways she couldn't begin to comprehend. But more than that, she'd found something she'd thought was lost forever. She'd found a connection, a thread stretching across decades, linking her loneliness to someone else's. Marcus had left this for her, not for her specifically maybe, but for someone like her, someone who needed to know that wonder still existed in the world. She closed the journal carefully and looked around the secret attic one more time. The afternoon sun slanted through the skylight, making the dust motes dance like tiny stars. Her grandmother would be home in 2 hours. Emma needed to climb back down, needed to act normal, needed to figure out what came next. But for just this moment, she let herself sit in the quiet, surrounded by treasures and secrets and the gift of a stranger who'd believed someone would come. Someone had. And Emma knew with the kind of certainty that settles in your bones that nothing would ever be the same again. Emma sat in the hidden attic for another 20 minutes, unable to move, unable to fully process what she'd discovered. The journal rested in her lap, Marcus's words still echoing in her mind. She opened it again, flipping past the entries she'd already read, searching for more. The middle pages were filled with meticulous documentation, lists of items acquired, prices paid, estimated future values. Marcus had been methodical, almost obsessive in his record-keeping. But toward the back, the entries became more personal again. One entry from December of 1983 caught her attention. Saw a girl today, maybe 7 or 8, playing alone in the park. She was building something with sticks, arranging them in careful patterns while other children ran past her. Nobody stopped to look at what she was making. Nobody asked. I wanted to tell her I saw her, that her careful work mattered. But I'm the strange old man everyone warns their kids about, so I didn't. But I thought about her tonight, arranging my collection, and I hoped that somewhere, sometime, someone like her would find this, someone who sees the value in things others overlook. Emma's throat tightened. She closed the journal and held it against her chest. Marcus had been lonely, just like her, had felt invisible, just like her, and somehow, across 40 years and a barrier of death, he'd reached out and found her. She stood up carefully, her legs stiff from sitting on the floor. She needed to look more closely at what was here, needed to understand the full scope of it before she decided what to do next. She moved systematically through the containers, reading labels, occasionally opening one to verify the contents matched the description. Vintage movie posters, original one-sheets from Casablanca, The Wizard of Oz, King Kong. Each one rolled in acid-free tubes, the colors still vibrant despite decades of storage. Antique photographs, prints by Ansel Adams, Dorothea Lange, original works from the 1930s and 40s. Fine art prints, signed lithographs by Picasso, Dali, Warhol, each one authenticated, documented, preserved behind museum-quality glass. There was a section devoted entirely to vintage instruments. A Fender Stratocaster from 1954, the sunburst finish glowing under the LED lights. A Gibson Les Paul from 1959, the legendary burst model that guitarists spent lifetimes trying to find. A Martin acoustic from 1942, its spruce top aged to a honey color. Emma didn't know much about guitars, but even she could see they were beautiful, works of craftsmanship from an era when things were built to last forever. In a climate-controlled case all its own, she found what looked like the crown jewel of the collection. A first edition, first printing of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, published in 1925. The dust jacket was intact, unfaded, the colors as bright as the day it had been printed. Marcus's notes said he'd purchased it at an estate sale in 1971 for $15. Current value, he'd estimated in his last update from 1983, somewhere around $200,000. Emma wondered what it might be worth now, 40 years later. She found vintage watches, Rolex, Patek Philippe, Omega, rare stamps in archival albums, some from countries that no longer existed. Original manuscripts, handwritten letters from famous authors. A signed copy of Catcher in the Rye, inscribed by J.D. Salinger himself. First pressings of vinyl records, The Beatles, Elvis, Buddy Holly, each one still sealed in its original shrink wrap. Every container she opened revealed another treasure. Every shelf held something impossible. And slowly, as she catalogued it all in her mind, Emma began to understand the true scope of what Marcus had created. This wasn't just a collection. It was a time capsule of American culture, carefully curated pieces from the 1930s through the 1980s, each one chosen not just for its value, but for its significance. Marcus had preserved the things that brought him joy, the things that reminded him the world could be beautiful and strange and full of wonder. The skylight above showed the sun sinking lower toward the horizon. Emma checked her phone. 4:45. Her grandmother would be home by 6. She needed to climb down, needed to figure out what to do with this information. But the thought of keeping it secret felt impossible. The weight of it was too much for a 9-year-old to carry alone. She placed the journal back in its cedar box, locked it carefully, and tucked the key into her pocket. Then she moved through the attic one more time, turning off lights, making sure everything was exactly as she'd found it. At the hatch, she paused and looked back. The collection sat in its careful rows, waiting patiently, as it had for decades. She wondered if Marcus's ghost was here somewhere, watching, hoping she'd be worthy of the gift he'd left. "I won't let you down," she whispered to the empty room. Then she climbed down through the hatch, locked it behind her, and made her way down the spiral stairs inside the hollow tree. The treehouse felt different now, smaller and less mysterious. Emma replaced the floorboard carefully, making sure it sat exactly as it had before. She brushed away her footprints in the dust, trying to leave no trace she'd been there. Then she climbed down the rope ladder, her arms shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline, and dropped the last few feet to the ground. Professor the cat was still in the yard, now grooming himself in the fading sunlight. Emma sat beside him, her heart still racing, and tried to think. She couldn't tell her grandmother, could she? Rose would worry, would think Emma had broken into something dangerous, would probably make her promise never to go back up there. But this was too big to keep secret, too important. And more than that, Emma realized, they needed help. She was 9 years old. She didn't know anything about appraising collectibles or dealing with valuable items or what to do with a hidden fortune worth more money than she could comprehend. They needed an adult, someone trustworthy, someone who could help them navigate whatever came next. Her grandmother. It had to be her grandmother. Emma stood up, brushed the dirt from her jeans, and walked into the house. She made herself a peanut butter sandwich she couldn't eat, did her homework without absorbing a single word, and waited for the sound of Rose's car in the driveway. Rose came home at 6:15, tired as always, her uniform smelling like coffee and maple syrup. She kissed Emma's forehead, asked about school in that distracted way adults do when they're too exhausted to really listen, and headed for the shower. Emma followed her down the hallway. "Grandma?" Rose paused at the bathroom door. "I need to tell you something. It's important." Something in Emma's voice must have registered because Rose turned around, really looked at her granddaughter for the first time since coming home. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. I'm better than fine, actually. But I did something today. Something you told me not to do." Rose's expression shifted, concern replacing exhaustion. "What did you do?" Emma took a breath. "I climbed the treehouse." Her grandmother's face went through several emotions at once. Anger, fear, relief that Emma was standing there unhurt. "Emma Davies, I explicitly told you—" "I know. I'm sorry. But Grandma, there's something up there. Something you need to see." "The only thing up there is rotten wood and a lawsuit waiting to happen," Rose said firmly. "You're grounded. 1 week. No TV. No—" "There's a secret room," Emma interrupted, "inside the tree, with stairs that go up from the treehouse, and it's full of valuable things, really valuable things, like millions of dollars valuable." Rose stared at her. "Emma, I know you have an active imagination, but making up stories to get out of trouble isn't—" "I'm not making it up." Emma pulled the brass key from her pocket. "This was hidden in the stairs. It opens a hatch, and above the hatch is an attic that Marcus Webb built, and it's full of collectibles he spent his whole life gathering. Comic books and coins and guitars and art and books and everything. He left a journal. He wanted someone to find it, someone brave enough to climb up there." Rose sat down slowly on the edge of the hallway bench, studying her granddaughter's face. Emma wasn't lying. Rose had raised enough kids in her life, including Emma's father, to know when a child was spinning tales. Emma's eyes were bright with something real, something that looked like wonder mixed with fear. "Show me," Rose said quietly. They waited until the sun had fully set, until the sky turned purple and the street lamps flickered on. Rose changed out of her uniform into jeans and a sweatshirt. Emma grabbed 2 flashlights from the kitchen drawer. Together they walked into the backyard, the rope ladder swaying slightly in the evening breeze. "I can't believe I'm doing this," Rose muttered, testing the first rung. "If we both break our necks, who's going to feed that mangy cat?" "His name is Professor," Emma said, "and he's not mangy." They climbed slowly, Rose going first, Emma behind her. Rose's joints protested with every step, but she made it to the treehouse platform and pulled herself up with a grunt. Emma followed easily, having made the climb twice already today. Inside the treehouse, Emma led her grandmother to the loose floorboard. "It's under here," she said, pulling it up. "The stairs go up inside the tree. It's hollow." Rose peered into the gap, shining her flashlight down into the spiral staircase. "Good Lord," she whispered. "How is this structurally possible?" "I don't know, but it is. Come on." They descended into the tree's hollow interior, Rose moving carefully, one hand on the bark wall for balance. Emma could hear her grandmother's breathing, quick and shallow. The stairs seemed longer in the dark, more precarious. But they reached the top without incident, and Emma produced the brass key. "Ready?" she asked. Rose nodded, not trusting her voice. Emma unlocked the hatch and pushed it open. The LED lights flickered on automatically, responding to the motion sensor Marcus had installed decades ago. Rose pulled herself up through the opening, and Emma heard her grandmother's sharp intake of breath. "Oh my God," Rose said. Then again, louder, "Oh my God!" Emma climbed up beside her. Together, they stood in the secret attic, surrounded by a fortune in carefully preserved treasures. Rose moved like she was in a trance, walking to the nearest container, reading the label, opening it with trembling hands. She pulled out the Action Comics issue, stared at it, set it down gently like it might explode. "Emma," she said, her voice shaking, "do you have any idea what this is?" "Superman's first appearance. Worth about $3 million, according to the book I read at the library." Rose sat down hard on the carpet. "This isn't possible. Things like this don't happen to people like us." "But it did happen," Emma said. "It's here. It's real." What happens next will turn their quiet lives upside down, reveal secrets that powerful people would rather stay buried, and prove that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust in wonder. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Rose spent the next 2 hours going through the collection with Emma, opening containers, reading Marcus's journal, trying to wrap her mind around what they'd found. The vintage toys alone, Rose estimated, could be worth hundreds of thousands. The guitars, maybe millions. The art, the books, the coins, it was overwhelming. Impossible to calculate without professional help. "We need to call someone," Rose said finally, sitting back against one of the shelving units. "An appraiser, an expert. I don't even know where to start." "The journal has some names," Emma said, flipping through Marcus's notes. "He mentions people he consulted, auction houses, collectors. Most of them are probably retired or dead by now, but maybe their companies still exist." Rose rubbed her temples. "This is insane. We can't just call Christie's and say, 'Hey, we found $100 million in comic books in a tree.' They'll think we're crazy. Or worse, they'll think we stole them." "But we didn't," Emma said firmly. "Marcus left them for whoever found them. He says so right here." She pointed to the passage in the journal. "Honey, I don't think the law works that way. This house, this property, it belonged to Marcus Webb. When he disappeared in 1984, it probably went into probate. I'd have to check the county records, but I'm betting it was sold for unpaid taxes. We rent this place from the Hendersons, remember? They own it, which means, legally, anything on the property probably belongs to them." Emma's stomach dropped. She hadn't thought about that. But that's not fair. Marcus didn't want the Hendersons to have this. He didn't even know them. He wanted someone who climbed the tree to have it, someone who was brave and curious. "Life isn't fair, sweetheart," Rose said gently. "You of all people know that." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of reality settling over the wonder. Then Emma had a thought. "What if we talk to Mr. Henderson first, before we tell anyone else? He's nice. He let us stay when we couldn't pay rent that 1 month after you got sick. Maybe he'd understand." Rose considered this. Gerald Henderson was indeed a decent man. A retired banker who'd inherited the property from a distant relative in the 90s. He'd been renting it to Rose below market value for the past 2 years, knowing her situation. He wasn't greedy, but this was different. This was generational wealth sitting in his oak tree. "Maybe," Rose said slowly, "but we need to document everything first. Take photos, make copies of the journal, create a record of exactly what's here. Because if word gets out, Emma, Things are going to get complicated very fast. They spent the rest of the evening photographing every item, every label, every page of Marcus's journal. Rose used her phone, making sure to capture everything clearly. Emma organized the photos into folders by category. By midnight, they had a complete digital archive of the collection. "We'll talk to Mr. Henderson tomorrow," Rose decided as they climbed back down through the tree. "But Emma, you can't tell anyone else. Not your friends, not your teacher, nobody. Do you understand? People get strange when money's involved. They get greedy and mean and unpredictable." Emma nodded, thinking about the kids at school who already treated her differently. She couldn't imagine what they'd do if they knew she'd found a fortune. That night, Emma lay in bed, unable to sleep. Her mind raced with possibilities and fears. What if Mr. Henderson took everything? What if they had to give it all up? What if Marcus's carefully preserved collection got sold off piece by piece to the highest bidder, scattered to the winds, his life's work dismantled for profit? She got up and went to her window, looking out at the oak tree silhouetted against the starry sky. Somewhere up there, hidden in the branches, Marcus's legacy waited. And Emma had made him a promise. She wouldn't let him down. The next afternoon, Rose called Gerald Henderson and asked if he could stop by the house. She didn't say why, just that it was important. Gerald arrived at 4, a tall man in his 60s with kind eyes and silver hair. He'd brought cookies from the bakery in town, the way he always did when he visited. "Rose, Emma, good to see you both," he said warmly. "What's this all about?" Rose glanced at Emma, took a breath and said, "Gerald, we found something on the property, something that belonged to the previous owner, Marcus Webb, something significant." Gerald's expression grew curious. "Marcus Webb? I barely remember him. My uncle owned this place back then, left it to me in his will. What did you find?" "It's easier to show you," Rose said. "But I need you to promise you'll hear us out before you make any decisions." "Now you've got me intrigued," Gerald said, setting down the cookies. "Lead the way." They took him to the backyard, to the base of the oak tree. Gerald looked up at the treehouse and frowned. "I've been meaning to have that thing torn down. It's got to be a liability." "Please don't," Emma said quickly. "Not yet. Just come see first." Gerald climbed the rope ladder with surprising agility for a man his age. Rose and Emma followed. In the treehouse, when Emma pulled up the floorboard and revealed the spiral stairs, Gerald's eyebrows shot up. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "I had no idea." They climbed up through the tree, Gerald huffing slightly from the exertion. At the top, Emma unlocked the hatch. When Gerald pulled himself into the attic and saw what waited there, he went completely silent. For a full minute he just stood there, slowly turning in a circle, taking in the rows of containers, the careful organization, the sheer scope of it all. "How long have you known about this?" he finally asked. 2 days, Rose said. "Emma found it on Tuesday." Gerald walked to one of the containers, read the label, opened it carefully. He pulled out a pristine copy of Amazing Fantasy No. 15, the first appearance of Spider-Man. His hands shook slightly. "Do you have any idea what this is worth?" "We've been researching," Rose said. "We think the total collection might be valued at over $200 million, maybe more." Gerald set the comic down like it had burned him. He walked to the cedar box, saw Marcus's journal, opened it with Rose's permission, and began to read. He stood there for 20 minutes, absorbed in Marcus's words, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of recognition. When he finished, he closed the journal gently and looked at Rose and Emma. "Marcus Webb was my uncle's best friend," he said quietly. "They grew up together. I met him a few times when I was young. He was quiet, kind of strange, but brilliant. After my uncle died and I inherited this place, I tried to find Marcus to let him know, but he'd already disappeared. The town assumed he'd died somewhere, maybe wandered off into the woods. Nobody looked very hard." He paused, emotion crossing his face. I had no idea he'd created this. No idea he'd spent his life building something so extraordinary. "What are you going to do?" Emma asked, her voice small. "Are you going to take it?" Gerald looked at her, really looked at her. and Emma saw something shift in his expression. "What do you think I should do?" "I think Marcus left this for someone who would appreciate it," Emma said. "Someone who climbed the tree even though everyone said not to. Someone who was brave enough to look for wonder. He didn't know who that would be, but he trusted they'd come eventually." "And you think that person is you?" Gerald asked gently. "I think I found it," Emma said, "and I promised him I wouldn't let him down." Gerald smiled, a sad sort of smile. "Marcus would have liked you. He always believed children saw the world more clearly than adults. Less cynicism, more wonder." He looked at Rose. "Legally, you're right. This collection was on property I own, which means it probably belongs to me, but morally?" He shook his head. "Marcus clearly intended this for someone else, someone who needed it. And I'm a retired banker with more money than I know what to do with. You two, on the other hand." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "Gerald, we're not asking you to give us anything. We just wanted to be honest, to do the right thing." "I know you're not asking," Gerald said. "That's exactly why I'm offering. Here's what I propose. We get this collection properly appraised by reputable experts. We document everything, make sure it's all legal and above board. Then we set up a trust. The collection stays together, gets displayed properly, maybe in a museum or foundation in Marcus's name. And the proceeds from any sales, any revenue it generates, that gets split. Part goes to maintaining and preserving the collection. Part goes to charity, causes Marcus cared about, and part goes to you two." "We can't accept that," Rose said, her voice breaking. "Why not?" Gerald asked. "Emma found it. You're honoring Marcus's wishes, and from what I can see, you need the help. No offense." "None taken," Rose said, wiping her eyes. "It's true. We're barely scraping by." "Then let's do this right," Gerald said. "Let's honor Marcus's memory and help your family at the same time. That's what he would have wanted. That's what I want." Emma launched herself at Gerald, hugging him fiercely. He patted her back awkwardly, clearly not used to spontaneous affection from 9-year-olds. "Thank you," Emma whispered. "Thank you for understanding." Over the next week, Gerald worked discreetly to bring in experts. He called a friend who ran an auction house in New York, someone he trusted completely. The friend recommended specialists: a comic book appraiser, a vintage toy expert, a musical instrument valuer, an art authenticator. One by one, they came to Millbrook, sworn to secrecy, and climbed the oak tree to see what waited in its branches. Their reactions were all the same: stunned silence followed by barely controlled excitement. This was the kind of discovery that happened once in a career, if that. A completely unknown collection, perfectly preserved, spanning decades of American cultural history. Some of the items were literally priceless, one-of-a-kind pieces that collectors had assumed were lost or destroyed. The formal appraisal took 3 weeks. The specialists worked carefully, documenting every item, researching provenance, verifying authenticity. Emma watched from a distance, attending school during the day, then racing home to see what new discoveries had been made. Rose took time off from the diner, using her saved vacation days to be present for the process. When the final appraisal report came in, Gerald called them to his office in town. He had the document on his desk, thick as a phone book, filled with photographs and documentation. He opened it to the final page and showed them the number. Total estimated value, $283 million. Rose made a sound like she'd been punched. Emma just stared at the number, trying to comprehend it. 283 million. It was abstract, impossible, a number so big it lost all meaning. "That's conservative," Gerald said. "If we auction the rarest pieces individually, we could see much higher returns. But I think we should do what I suggested. Create the Marcus Webb Foundation. Display the collection publicly. Let people see what one quiet man accomplished through dedication and vision, and use the resources to help others." "Yes," Emma said immediately. "That's what Marcus would want." Rose nodded, unable to speak. Gerald smiled. "Then let's make it official." That night, Emma sat in her bedroom, Marcus's journal open on her lap. She'd read it cover to cover 3 times now, But she kept finding new details, new insights into the man who'd changed her life without ever meeting her. Near the very end, she found an entry she'd somehow missed before. It was dated March 15th, 1984, just weeks before Marcus disappeared. The handwriting was shakier than earlier entries, his illness clearly progressing. "I'm dying," he'd written. "The doctors give me months, maybe weeks. I've made my peace with it, but I worry about the collection. I've spent 40 years building this, preserving these pieces of joy and wonder. What happens to them when I'm gone? I have no one to leave them to, no one who would understand. So I've decided to leave them to the future, to whoever is brave enough to climb despite the warnings, curious enough to look beyond the obvious, someone young maybe, with their whole life ahead of them. Someone who needs to remember that the world still holds magic and possibility. If you're reading this, then you're that person, and I want you to know something. You're not alone. I was alone most of my life, but finding these treasures, preserving these pieces of human creativity and imagination, it gave me purpose. It made my life mean something." Don't let anyone tell you these are just things. They're not. They're proof that people can create beauty. That imagination matters. That wonder is worth preserving. Take care of them, share them. Let them remind you and everyone who sees them that the world is bigger and more extraordinary than we allow ourselves to believe. And if you're reading this, then you've already proven you're brave. You've already proven you're curious. You've already proven you're exactly who I hoped would find this. Thank you for climbing the tree. Thank you for looking up. Emma closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. She understood now. Marcus hadn't left her money. He'd left her something far more valuable, proof that one person's life could matter, that dedication and vision could create something that outlasted death. That wonder was real and worth fighting for. She wiped her eyes and looked out the window at the oak tree, dark against the star-filled sky. Somewhere up there, in the secret attic among the treasures, she could almost feel Marcus smiling. "Thank you for waiting," she whispered. "Thank you for believing someone would come." The night air was still and silent, but somehow Emma felt like she'd been heard. The first news story broke on a Wednesday morning in late October. Emma was eating cereal at the kitchen table when her grandmother's phone buzzed with a text from Gerald Henderson. The message contained a link to the Portland Tribune's website. The headline read, "Small Town Discovery, Hidden Collection Worth Hundreds of Millions Found in Oregon Treehouse." Rose clicked the article with trembling fingers. Someone had leaked the story. The piece was light on details but heavy on speculation, mentioning Millbrook by name, describing a significant collection of vintage collectibles discovered on private property. It quoted anonymous sources from the appraisal team, estimating the value at well over $200 million. By noon, the story had been picked up by national outlets. Emma came home from school to find 3 news vans parked on their street. Reporters stood on the sidewalk with cameras, waiting. Rose had closed all the curtains, locked the doors, and was on the phone with Gerald, her voice tight with anxiety. "I don't know how they found out," she was saying. "No, we haven't talked to anyone. Gerald, what do we do?" Emma peeked through a gap in the curtains. More cars were arriving, people with expensive cameras, men in suits. A woman in a red blazer was doing a stand-up report in front of their house, gesturing toward the oak tree visible in the backyard. Emma's stomach churned. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. This was supposed to be quiet, dignified, a way to honor Marcus's memory. Gerald arrived 20 minutes later, pushing through the crowd of reporters with a firm, no comment to every shouted question. Inside the house, he looked exhausted. "I've contacted a lawyer," he said. "Someone I trust who specializes in estate law and high-value assets. Her name is Patricia Chen, and she's driving up from Portland tomorrow. In the meantime, we say nothing. No interviews, no comments, nothing. Understood?" Rose and Emma nodded. "This is going to get messy," Gerald continued, sitting heavily on the couch. "When this much money is involved, people come out of the woodwork. Family members you've never heard of. People claiming they knew Marcus, that he promised them things. Treasure hunters, opportunists. We need to protect the collection and protect you too. He was right. By the end of the week, the story had gone viral. Cable news shows debated whether the collection legally belonged to Emma, to Gerald as the property owner, or to the state. Social media exploded with theories and opinions. Treasure hunting forums dissected every detail, trying to figure out if there might be more hidden collections elsewhere. Emma's school had to hire security to keep reporters off campus. And then, on Monday morning, a lawyer appeared at Gerald Henderson's office with a letter. The letter was from a man named Richard Webb, claiming to be Marcus Webb's nephew. Richard was demanding an immediate halt to any sale or transfer of the collection, asserting that as Marcus's only living relative, he was the rightful heir to everything Marcus had owned. Patricia Chen, the estate lawyer Gerald had hired, reviewed the letter in Gerald's office with Rose and Emma present. Patricia was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and precise, with short black hair and an air of complete competence. She set the letter down and looked at them over her reading glasses. "This complicates things," she said simply. "If Richard Webb can prove he's Marcus's nephew and that Marcus died without a will, he may have a legitimate claim under intestate succession laws." "But Marcus didn't want his family to have this," Emma protested. "He says so in his journal. He says he had no family he trusted." Patricia's expression softened. "I believe you, Emma. But legally, what someone writes in a personal journal doesn't carry the same weight as a legal document. We need to find out if Marcus left a will. If he did, and it specifies what should happen to his possessions, that would supersede any claim from relatives." "Where would we even look?" Rose asked. "Marcus disappeared in 1984. If there was a will, wouldn't it have surfaced during probate?" "Not necessarily," Patricia said. "If no one knew about the collection, there would have been nothing of value to probate. The property itself was sold for unpaid taxes, as you know. But Marcus might have filed a will with the county clerk, or kept it with a lawyer, or hidden it somewhere. We need to search." Over the next 2 weeks, they searched everywhere. Patricia requested records from the county clerk's office. Gerald contacted every lawyer who'd practiced in Millbrook during the 1980s. Emma and Rose, with Gerald's permission, went through the attic collection again, looking for any legal documents Marcus might have hidden among his treasures. They found nothing. Meanwhile, Richard Webb arrived in Millbrook with his own team of lawyers. He was 58, tall and thin, with Marcus's same sharp nose, but none of his gentle eyes. Richard had made his money in real estate development in California and carried himself with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. He held a press conference on the steps of the county courthouse, cameras flashing, declaring his intention to reclaim his uncle's collection and see justice done. "My uncle was a troubled man," Richard told the reporters, his voice somber and practiced. "He isolated himself from family, from anyone who cared about him. It's tragic that he died alone, and even more tragic that strangers are now trying to profit from his life's work. As his only surviving family member, I intend to ensure his legacy is properly managed." Emma watched the press conference on the news that night and felt sick. Richard made Marcus sound pathetic, broken, someone to be pitied. He didn't talk about Marcus's brilliance or his vision or the extraordinary thing he'd created. He just talked about value and legacy and proper management, code words for selling everything to the highest bidder. "He doesn't care about Marcus," Emma said to her grandmother. "He just wants the money." Rose put her arm around Emma's shoulders. "I know, honey, but sometimes people with money and lawyers get what they want, even when it's not right." "That's not fair." "No," Rose agreed quietly. "It's not." The legal battle escalated quickly. Richard's lawyers filed a formal claim in probate court, arguing that in the absence of a will, Marcus's estate should pass to his next of kin. Patricia counter-argued that the collection had been abandoned property, that Marcus had deliberately hidden it with the intent of transferring ownership to whoever discovered it, and that Gerald Henderson, as the current property owner, had the right to dispose of it as he saw fit. The judge, a weary-looking woman named Sandra Oakes, ordered both parties to mediation. But during the first mediation session, it became clear Richard had no interest in compromise. He wanted everything, or he'd tie the case up in court for years. "He's betting we can't afford a long legal battle," Patricia explained to Gerald, Rose and Emma after the failed mediation. He's got deep pockets and a team of lawyers on retainer. He thinks we'll give up or settle for a fraction of the collection's value just to make him go away. What if we do settle? Rose asked quietly. What if we just give him half and end this? No, Emma said fiercely. We can't. Marcus didn't want this. He didn't want his family to have it because they never understood him. They made him feel alone. We can't just hand everything over because Richard has better lawyers. Gerald looked at Emma for a long moment, then at Rose. The girl's right. Marcus was my uncle's best friend. I knew him, not well, but enough to know he was genuine. If he went to all this trouble to hide the collection, to leave it for someone who'd appreciate it, then we owe it to him to fight. Fighting could cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees, Patricia warned. Maybe more. Even if we win, it'll take years. And there's no guarantee we will win. Then we find a will, Emma said. There has to be one. Marcus was too careful, too organized to die without leaving instructions. We just haven't looked in the right place yet. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Marcus. Where would he have hidden a will? It had to be somewhere meaningful, somewhere protected, somewhere only the right person would think to look. She got up, grabbed her flashlight, and went to her window. The oak tree stood dark against the starlit sky, branches swaying gently in the October wind. The tree. Everything important was in the tree. Marcus had hidden his life's work there, had built a secret sanctuary in its branches. If he'd hidden a will, wouldn't he have put it in the same place? Emma crept downstairs, careful not to wake her grandmother. She knew this was reckless, knew she should wait until morning, should tell an adult, but something pulled at her, urgent and insistent. She slipped out the back door into the cold night air. The rope ladder was icy with dew. Emma climbed carefully, her hands numb, her breath making clouds in the darkness. The treehouse was pitch black inside. She used her flashlight to navigate to the loose floorboard, pulled it up, and descended into the hollow tree. The spiral stairs felt different at night, more mysterious, almost alive. She climbed up to the hatch, unlocked it, and pulled herself into the attic. The LED lights flickered on, casting everything in their familiar soft glow. Emma stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, trying to think like Marcus. Where would he hide a will? It had to be here, but they'd already searched every container, every box. She'd read every page of the journal. Where else could it be? Her eyes landed on the cedar box that held the journal. They'd looked inside it, of course, had found the journal and the silk wrapping. But had they looked under the silk? Emma moved quickly to the box, lifted out the journal, and removed the silk cloth. Underneath was the smooth cedar bottom of the box. Except it wasn't quite smooth. There was a slight irregularity in one corner, a tiny gap. Emma pressed it with her thumb and heard a soft click. The bottom of the box lifted up, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Inside were 3 documents. The first was Marcus's birth certificate. The second was a faded photograph of Marcus as a young man, standing beside another man who looked remarkably similar to Gerald Henderson. On the back, someone had written, Marcus and Thomas, summer of 1952, brothers in all but blood. The third document made Emma's hands shake. It was a last will and testament, properly notarized, dated November 7th, 1983. Emma read it quickly, her heart pounding. Marcus had indeed left a will, and its contents were going to change everything. The will was simple but specific. Marcus Webb, being of sound mind, left his entire estate to the future occupant or discoverer of the property located at 47 Maple Street, Millbrook, Oregon, who demonstrates the courage and curiosity to seek what others overlook. There were specific instructions. The collection was to be kept together when possible, displayed publicly, and used to inspire wonder in others. Any proceeds from necessary sales were to fund educational programs in the arts and sciences. And then, at the bottom, a final paragraph that made Emma's throat tight. I leave this to someone I will never meet, but someone I believe in. Someone young enough to still see magic in the world. someone brave enough to climb. You found this because you were meant to. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The will had been witnessed by two people, a notary public named Helen Carr and Thomas Henderson, Gerald's uncle. It was legally binding, properly executed, and exactly what they needed. Emma carefully folded the documents, placed them back in the hidden compartment, and climbed down from the attic as fast as she could safely manage. She ran across the backyard, into the house, and up the stairs to her grandmother's room. "Grandma," she said, shaking Rose awake. "Grandma, I found it. I found Marcus's will." By morning, Patricia Chen had reviewed the document and confirmed its validity. By afternoon, she'd filed it with the probate court. By evening, every news outlet in the country was reporting the shocking development. Marcus Webb had left his fortune not to family, but to whoever found it. And that person was a 9-year-old girl named Emma Davies. Richard Webb's lawyers tried to contest the will, arguing it was too vague, that future occupant or discoverer didn't legally specify anyone. But Patricia demolished their arguments. Emma had discovered the collection. Emma was currently occupying the property with her grandmother. Emma fit every criterion Marcus had specified. The will was clear, witnessed, and ironclad. Judge Oakes scheduled a hearing for 2 weeks later to make a final ruling. In the meantime, the media circus intensified. Emma couldn't go to school without being followed by cameras. Reporters called the house at all hours. People she'd never met claimed to be long-lost relatives or friends of Marcus, hoping for a piece of the fortune. And then the death threats started. Not against Emma directly, but whispered warnings. Anonymous letters suggesting Rose should reconsider her position. A brick through their window one night with a note: "Greedy people get hurt." Rose called the police, and Sheriff Coleman assigned a deputy to watch their house, but the damage was done. Emma stopped sleeping well. Rose looked 10 years older from the stress. "Maybe we should just give it up," Rose said one night, holding Emma close on the couch. "It's not worth this. We were fine before. We can be fine again." "But Marcus wanted me to have it," Emma said, her voice small. "He left it for someone like me. If we give up, then Richard wins, and everything Marcus built just gets sold off and forgotten. All that wonder, all that beauty just gone." Rose was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You're braver than I am, sweetheart." "I'm scared too," Emma admitted. "But being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing anyway." The night before the hearing, Gerald Henderson came to their house with Patricia Chen. They sat at the kitchen table, going over what would happen in court. Patricia would present the will, argue Emma's case, and request that Judge Oakes validate the will and dismiss Richard's claim. "It should be straightforward," Patricia said. "The will is legitimate, but Richard's team might try to argue that Marcus wasn't of sound mind when he wrote it, that his illness affected his judgment. We need to be prepared for that." "Do you think we'll win?" Emma asked. Patricia looked at her with honest eyes. "I think we have a strong case. But I've been practicing law for 20 years, and I've learned that nothing is certain until the judge's gavel falls." That night, Emma couldn't sleep at all. She stood at her window looking out at the oak tree and thought about Marcus. About a lonely man who'd spent his life collecting pieces of wonder, who'd died alone, who'd left everything to a stranger because he believed in the power of curiosity and courage. She thought about what he'd written. "You found this because you were meant to." "I won't let you down," she whispered again, the same promise she'd made weeks ago. "I won't let them take this away." The courthouse in Millbrook was small, barely large enough for the crowd that showed up. The gallery was packed with reporters, townspeople, and curious onlookers. Emma sat at the plaintiff's table with Rose and Patricia, wearing the nicest dress her grandmother had been able to buy at the thrift store. Across the aisle, Richard Webb sat with his team of expensive lawyers in sharp suits, looking confident and relaxed. Judge Oakes entered, and everyone stood. She was in her 60s, with steel grey hair and an expression that suggested she suffered no fools. She settled into her chair, reviewed the files in front of her, and looked up. This is a hearing to determine the validity of the last will and testament of Marcus Webb, deceased, and to rule on the competing claims to his estate. I've reviewed the submitted documents. Miss Chen, you may present your argument. Patricia stood. Thank you, Your Honor. The facts are straightforward. Marcus Webb executed a legal will in November of 1983, properly witnessed and notarized. That will specifies that his estate should pass to the future occupant or discoverer of his former property. My client, Emma Davies, discovered Mr. Webb's collection on the property where she currently resides. She meets every requirement specified in the will. Your Honor, Richard's lead attorney stood, a slick man named Davidson. The will is deliberately vague. Future occupant or discoverer could mean anyone. My client is Mr. Webb's blood relative, his next of kin. Under Oregon intestate succession law, he has a rightful claim. Mr. Webb had a will, Patricia interrupted, which means intestate succession doesn't apply. A will that was hidden for 40 years, Davidson countered. A will written by a man suffering from terminal cancer in pain, possibly not of sound mind. We request a psychiatric evaluation of Mr. Webb's mental state at the time. Mr. Webb is dead, Judge Oakes said dryly. A bit late for a psychiatric evaluation. Medical records then, Your Honor. Testimony from his doctors. Anything that might indicate... That might indicate what, Mr. Davidson? That a man who spent 40 years building an extraordinary collection, who meticulously documented every acquisition, who engineered a secret preservation system, was somehow incompetent. I find that unlikely. Emma felt a flicker of hope. Judge Oakes didn't seem impressed by Richard's lawyers. The hearing went on for 3 hours. Patricia presented the will, the witnesses' signatures, proof of its filing with the notary. She brought in handwriting experts who confirmed the signature was Marcus's. She showed photographs of the collection, Marcus's journal entries, evidence of his clear mind and deliberate planning. Richard's team tried to argue that Marcus had been estranged from family due to mental illness, that the will was a product of paranoia and delusion. They brought in a psychiatrist who'd never met Marcus but testified about how terminal illness could affect judgment. It was desperate and flimsy, and Judge Oakes looked increasingly irritated. Finally, she called a recess. Emma, Rose, and Patricia waited in a small conference room, not speaking, just holding on to hope. An hour later, they were called back. Judge Oakes looked tired but decisive. I've reviewed all the evidence presented today. The will is legitimate, properly executed, and legally binding. Mr. Webb was clearly of sound mind, as evidenced by his meticulous record-keeping and the sophisticated nature of his preservation efforts. The language of the will, while unconventional, is clear in its intent. Emma Davies discovered the collection. Emma Davies currently occupies the property. Emma Davies is therefore the rightful beneficiary of Marcus Webb's estate. Emma heard the words but couldn't quite process them. Rose grabbed her hand, squeezing tight. Mr. Webb's claim is dismissed, Judge Oakes continued, looking at Richard. The estate of Marcus Webb passes to Emma Davies, subject to the conditions specified in his will. I'm appointing Miss Patricia Chen as guardian ad litem to ensure the collection is managed appropriately until Miss Davies reaches majority. Court adjourned. The gavel fell. The room erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors. Rose pulled Emma into a fierce hug, tears streaming down her face. Gerald was grinning. Patricia allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Richard Webb stood slowly, his face a mask of fury. He stared at Emma across the courtroom, and for a moment she felt afraid. Then he turned and walked out, his lawyers trailing behind him. They'd won. Against all odds, they'd won. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. Patricia held up a hand. We have a brief statement. The Davies family is grateful for Judge Oakes's ruling. We intend to honor Marcus Webb's wishes by creating a foundation to preserve and display his collection. The Marcus Webb Museum of Wonder will open to the public next year here in Millbrook, ensuring that his extraordinary legacy inspires future generations. Thank you. She ushered Emma and Rose to Gerald's car, shielding them from the crowd. They drove back to the house in silence, too emotionally exhausted to speak. But as they pulled into the driveway, Emma looked up at the oak tree, at the treehouse barely visible in its branches, and felt something shift inside her. She'd done it. She'd kept her promise to Marcus. She'd been brave enough to fight for wonder. That night, after everything had quieted down, Emma climbed the tree one more time. She sat in the attic, surrounded by treasures that were now legally hers to protect, and opened Marcus's journal to the last page. Below his final entry, she wrote her own in careful script. "Dear Marcus, I found your collection. I fought for it, and I promise I'll take care of it the way you would have wanted. You were right. The world still holds magic and possibility. Thank you for believing someone would climb. Thank you for waiting for me. Your friend, Emma." She closed the journal and sat in the quiet, feeling Marcus's presence like a gentle hand on her shoulder. Somewhere, somehow, she knew he was smiling. The weeks following the court victory blurred together in a whirlwind of activity that left Emma dizzy with possibility and exhaustion. Patricia Chen worked 18-hour days establishing the Marcus Webb Foundation, filing paperwork with the state, setting up tax structures and nonprofit designations. Gerald Henderson donated an empty building on Main Street, a former hardware store that had sat vacant for 5 years, to serve as the future museum. And Emma, with Rose always at her side, began the enormous task of cataloguing Marcus's life through the items he'd left behind. She started with the journal, reading it cover to cover again, but this time looking for patterns, for clues about who Marcus had been beyond the careful collector. She found them in the margins, in small notes he'd made to himself. "Mrs. Patterson's son loved Spider-Man. Wish I could have given him issue number 1. Maybe someday someone will." Or, "Saw a girl at the library today reading about guitars. Reminded me why I save these things, for people who still believe in magic." Patricia had arranged for climate-controlled storage while the museum was being prepared, but Emma insisted on keeping some items in the attic. The most meaningful ones, she said, the ones Marcus had written about most lovingly. The Action Comics #1 stayed. So did the Martin guitar from 1942 and the first edition Great Gatsby. These were Marcus's favorites, and they deserved to stay in the place he'd built for them, at least for a little while longer. The town of Millbrook reacted to the news with a mixture of pride and disbelief. Their sleepy little town was about to become home to one of the most valuable private collections in American history. Property values began to rise almost immediately. The diner where Rose worked saw business triple as curious tourists started arriving, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous Treehouse or the girl who'd found a fortune. Rose finally gave notice after 23 years of pouring coffee, her hands shaking as she handed the letter to Millie. "You sure about this?" Millie had asked, her eyes wet. "What if the museum thing doesn't work out?" "Then I'll come back," Rose had said, though they both knew she wouldn't need to. The foundation had already allocated a salary for Rose as Emma's guardian and assistant curator. Not a fortune, but enough that she'd never have to worry about rent or medical bills or stretching ground beef for 3 meals again. Emma returned to school in November, 3 weeks after the hearing. She'd missed so much class that her teachers had suggested she might need to repeat 4th grade, but Emma attacked her makeup work with the same fierce determination she'd shown climbing the oak tree. She finished everything in 2 weeks, then asked for extra credit assignments. Her teacher, Mrs. Morrison, just shook her head in amazement and gave her advanced reading materials about museum curation and art history. The other students didn't know how to act around her anymore. Some were jealous, whispering that she'd just gotten lucky, that anyone could have found the collection if they'd been brave enough to climb. Others treated her like a celebrity, asking for autographs or trying to become her best friend overnight. Emma ignored both groups and ate lunch with Professor the Cat, who'd taken to waiting for her by the school fence every day at noon. One afternoon in early December, as Emma sat in the attic organizing Marcus's baseball cards by year and condition, she found a section of the journal she'd somehow missed. The pages had stuck together, probably from humidity decades ago, and separated now to reveal entries from 1976. She read them slowly, her breath catching. "My brother called today," Marcus had written. "First time in 11 years. He wants money. His son Richard is going to college, needs help with tuition. I said I'd think about it. But I know what will happen if I say yes. He'll ask for more. He always does. He doesn't call because he loves me. He calls because he thinks I'm weak and lonely and desperate for family. Maybe I am. But I'm not desperate enough to buy affection anymore. I tried that when we were young. Bought him a car once, paid his rent twice, loaned him money that never came back. He only calls when he needs something, never on my birthday, never just to talk. I told him no today. He called me selfish, said I was hoarding money I didn't need, that family should help family, but he stopped being my family when I stopped being useful. I'm done pretending otherwise. Emma sat back, understanding flooding through her. Marcus had tried to connect with his brother, with Richard's father, had been hurt, used, rejected. That's why the will specified a stranger. That's why he'd hidden everything away. His family had taught him that love came with conditions, that relationships were transactions. So he'd decided to trust the universe instead, to leave his legacy to someone who'd earn it through curiosity rather than blood. She kept reading. The later entries painted a picture of increasing isolation, but also growing peace. Marcus had stopped trying to fit into a world that didn't understand him. Instead, he'd built his own world, one piece at a time, one carefully preserved treasure at a time. He wrote about the joy of finding a pristine Honus Wagner baseball card at an estate sale, the seller having no idea what they had. About discovering an original Picasso lithograph at a flea market, priced at $5 because the frame was broken. About the thrill of rescue, of saving these pieces of beauty from being lost or destroyed. People don't understand, he'd written in 1981. They think I'm collecting things because I love objects more than people. But that's not it. I'm collecting these things because they represent the best of what people can create. Every comic book is an artist's dream made real. Every guitar is a craftsman's pursuit of perfect sound. Every painting is a soul laid bare on canvas. These aren't just things. They're proof that human beings are capable of extraordinary beauty. And if no one else will protect that, preserve that, remember that, then I will. Emma felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She understood him completely. After her parents died, she'd felt disconnected from everything, like the world had become flat and colorless. But climbing that tree, finding Marcus's treasures, fighting to protect his legacy, it had given her purpose. Had reminded her that wonder still existed. Marcus had known that feeling, had lived it. And he'd left her the gift of discovering it for herself. By Christmas, the museum building was taking shape. Contractors worked to restore the old hardware store, installing climate control systems, security measures, and display cases. Gerald oversaw the construction with an attention to detail that surprised everyone. He'd retired from banking years ago but seemed energized by this project, arriving at the site every morning with coffee and blueprints, consulting with architects and designers. Emma visited the construction site after school most days, wearing the hard hat Gerald had bought her, asking questions about everything. She learned about UV filtering glass to protect the vintage posters, about humidity controls for the paper collectibles, about security systems that could detect movement, temperature changes, even vibrations. The museum wouldn't just display Marcus's collection, it would protect it the way he had. Patricia Chen brought in a team of curators from major museums in New York and Los Angeles to help design the exhibits. They spent weeks with Emma, asking her questions about Marcus's journal, about which items meant the most, about how the collection should be presented. Emma insisted that the displays tell Marcus's story, not just showcase expensive items. People need to know who he was, she explained during one planning meeting. They need to understand why he did this. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of valuable stuff behind glass. But if they know about Marcus, about his loneliness and his vision and his belief in wonder, then it becomes something more. It becomes a story about what one person can accomplish when they dedicate themselves to something beautiful. The lead curator, a woman named Dr. Sarah Mendez from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, smiled at that. "You're absolutely right. We'll make Marcus the heart of the exhibition. The collection is what brings people in, but his story is what will make them stay." They decided to recreate Marcus's attic inside the museum, building an exact replica where visitors could see how he'd organized everything, how he'd preserved it, how he'd lived with these treasures. The real attic would be preserved too, as part of the Foundation's historical properties, but kept private. A sacred space, Emma said, where she could go when she needed to feel close to Marcus. In February, something unexpected happened. Richard Webb called Patricia Chen's office and asked for a meeting. Patricia was immediately suspicious, wondering if he planned to restart legal proceedings, but agreed to meet him at her Portland office with Emma and Rose present. They drove down on a rainy Saturday morning, Emma nervous and Rose protective. Richard was already waiting in the conference room when they arrived. He looked different than he had at the courthouse, older, tired, less arrogant. He stood when they entered. "Thank you for seeing me," he said quietly. "I know I don't deserve your time." Emma said nothing, just sat down and waited. Rose kept a hand on her granddaughter's shoulder. Richard cleared his throat. "I came to apologize. Not because my lawyers told me to, though they did suggest it might help if I ever want to contest anything again. I'm not planning to, by the way. I came because I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few months, and I realized something. I never knew my uncle. Not really. My father, Marcus's brother, he always talked about Uncle Marcus like he was some kind of charity case. The weird one. The failure who never married, never had kids, never did anything important with his life. And I believed him. I believed Marcus was someone to be pitied at best, mocked at worst." He paused, emotion crossing his face. "But then I started researching after the hearing. I went online and read about the collection. I bought copies of some of the comics he'd preserved, tried to understand what he saw in them. And I read articles about your museum plans, about how you're trying to honor his vision. And I realized my father lied to me. Maybe not intentionally, but through ignorance. Marcus wasn't a failure. He was extraordinary, and I was too blinded by greed and my father's prejudices to see it." Emma watched him carefully. "Marcus tried to connect with your father. I read about it in his journal. Your dad only called when he needed money." Richard nodded, his jaw tight. "That sounds like him. My father was a user. He died when I was 25. And even at his funeral, people told stories about how he'd borrowed money and never paid it back, made promises he never kept. I spent my whole life trying not to be like him, but when I heard about the collection, about the money, I became exactly what I hated. I saw dollar signs instead of legacy. I fought you not because I cared about Marcus, but because I wanted what was mine. Except it wasn't mine. It was never mine. Marcus made that very clear in his will." "So why are you here?" Rose asked, her voice hard. "To apologize," Richard said again, "and to offer help if you'll have it. I work in real estate development. I know construction, project management, fundraising. If you need any assistance getting the museum operational, I'd like to contribute. Not as family claiming ownership, but as someone trying to make amends for being a greedy fool." Emma looked at Patricia, who gave a small shrug. The decision was Emma's to make. "Did you know Marcus liked Superman?" Emma asked suddenly. Richard blinked at the change of subject. "What?" "Superman. He collected 53 different Superman comics, not because they were valuable, but because he loved the stories. He wrote about it in his journal. He said Superman represented hope, the idea that someone could be good and powerful and use that power to help people. He said when he was a kid, he got bullied a lot for being quiet and strange, and reading Superman comics made him feel less alone." Richard's eyes glistened. "I didn't know that." "There's a lot you didn't know about him," Emma said. "But that's not your fault. Marcus never got the chance to tell you. Your father made sure of that. But if you really want to help, if you really want to honor Marcus, then yes, we could use someone who knows about construction and fundraising. The museum is important. It's how we make sure Marcus's story gets told. So people know he wasn't weird or pitiful or a failure. He was someone who believed in beauty and wonder and preserving the best of what people can create." Richard nodded, not trusting his voice. Patricia pulled out a contract she'd prepared just in case, outlining Richard's role as a volunteer consultant with no financial stake in the foundation. Richard signed it without reading it. As they stood to leave, Richard stopped Emma. "Can I ask you something? Why did you fight so hard for this? You're 9 years old. You could have walked away, let the adults handle it, lived a normal life. Why did it matter so much?" Emma thought about her parents, about the hollow space their deaths had left, about feeling invisible and small and like nothing she did mattered, about climbing a forbidden tree and finding purpose waiting in its branches. "Because Marcus believed in me before he ever met me," she said simply. "He believed someone would come who'd understand, and I did, and I couldn't let him down." Richard smiled, sad and understanding. "He would have really liked you." "I know," Emma said. "I wish I could have met him too." Spring arrived, and with it came the final push to complete the museum. Richard proved invaluable, using his connections to negotiate better prices on construction materials, bringing in contractors who owed him favors, fundraising from his wealthy friends who were moved by Marcus's story. The budget that had seemed barely adequate suddenly had room to breathe, to add features they'd thought were impossible. Emma turned 10 in April. Her grandmother threw her a party at the museum construction site, the workers all singing happy birthday while Emma stood in the half-finished main gallery surrounded by scaffolding and drop cloths, and the promise of something extraordinary. Gerald gave her a leather-bound notebook, empty pages waiting to be filled. "For your own journal," he said, "to document your journey the way Marcus documented his." That night, Emma made her first entry. "Today I turned 10. Last year at this time, I felt like the smallest, most invisible person in the world. Now I'm standing in the middle of something that's going to change lives. Not just mine, but everyone who comes here and remembers that wonder is real. Marcus started this. I'm just finishing what he began. I hope that's enough. I hope I'm making him proud." The museum opened on June 15th, a perfect Saturday with clear skies and warm sunshine. The entire town turned out, along with reporters from around the world, collectors, museum professionals, and thousands of curious visitors who'd driven hours to be part of history. The ribbon-cutting ceremony featured Emma, Rose, Gerald, Patricia, and Richard standing together, scissors poised over the red ribbon stretched across the entrance. "This museum represents more than valuable collectibles," Emma said into the microphone, her voice stronger than she felt. "It represents one man's belief that beauty and wonder deserve to be protected. Marcus Webb spent his life preserving pieces of human creativity and imagination. He did it alone, in secret, because he knew the world wasn't ready to understand. But he also believed that someday, someone would find what he'd hidden, someone who'd fight to protect it. I was that someone. And now, we get to share Marcus's gift with everyone. Welcome to the Marcus Webb Museum of Wonder." She cut the ribbon, and the doors opened. Inside, the museum was breathtaking. The main gallery featured the crown jewels of the collection, the Action Comics #1 in a temperature-controlled case, lit dramatically. The Martin guitar displayed alongside recordings of the music it had made. The first edition Gatsby opened to a page where Fitzgerald had made a handwritten correction. Each item had a placard explaining not just its value, but its significance to Marcus, quotes from his journal about why he'd acquired it and what it meant to him. The walls were covered with blown-up photographs from Marcus's life, many discovered in boxes in the attic. Marcus as a boy, serious and bookish. Marcus as a young man, awkward in his accountant's suit. Marcus in his 50s, grey-haired and gentle-eyed, holding a vintage guitar with something like reverence. And in the center of the gallery, the replica of his attic, recreated in perfect detail, visitors could walk through and see exactly how he'd organized everything, how he'd lived with his treasures. But Emma's favorite exhibit was in a smaller room off the main gallery. This one was called the Treehouse, and featured photographs of the oak tree, the rope ladder, the hidden stairs. It explained how Emma had discovered the collection, including a video where she talked about that first climb, about finding the floorboard and the spiral stairs and the hatch that changed everything. The room displayed Marcus's journal in a case, open to the page where he'd written about leaving his collection to someone brave enough to climb. And on one wall, a quote in Marcus's handwriting, enlarged to 6 feet tall. "The world still holds magic and possibility. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The museum was an instant sensation. Within the first month, over 50,000 people visited. School groups came from across the state, children pressing their noses against display cases, asking questions, imagining what it would be like to find their own hidden treasure. Emma gave tours on weekends, telling Marcus's story over and over, never tiring of it. She watched people's faces as they learned about the lonely collector who'd believed in wonder, saw their expressions shift from curiosity to understanding to something like love. The economic impact on Millbrook was immediate and transformative. Hotels opened to accommodate the flood of tourists. Restaurants expanded, gift shops appeared selling Marcus Webb merchandise, proceeds going to the foundation. The town that had been dying for decades suddenly had purpose again, had something to be proud of. Rose started an education program at the museum, bringing in experts to teach classes on art history, comic book illustration, musical instrument craftsmanship, all the subjects Marcus had loved. Emma helped design a summer camp for kids interested in collecting, teaching them about preservation and curation and the joy of finding beauty in unexpected places. The camp filled up within hours of opening registration. But the most meaningful moment came in August, 3 months after the opening. Emma was in the museum's education room, preparing materials for a class on vintage photography, when one of the docents found her.
"Emma, there's someone here who's asking for you, an older woman. She says she knew Marcus."
Emma's heart jumped. She followed the docent to the main gallery and found a tiny woman in her 80s, white-haired and bird-like, standing in front of Marcus's photograph. The woman was crying softly.
"Mom?" Emma said gently. "I'm Emma Davies. They said you knew Marcus."
The woman turned, her watery blue eyes studying Emma's face. "You're the girl who found his collection, the one who fought to protect it." "Yes, ma'am." "My name is Helen Carr. I was the notary who witnessed Marcus's will in 1983, but before that, I was his friend. One of very few, I'm afraid." Emma's breath caught.
"You knew him?"
"For 40 years, Helen said, her voice thick with emotion. "We met at an estate sale in 1943, both of us hunting for treasures. We became friends, though we lived in different cities. We wrote letters, hundreds of letters over the decades. When he got sick, he asked me to come witness his will. He told me about his plan to hide the collection, to leave it for someone who'd appreciate it the way he did. I thought he was crazy. I begged him to sell it, to use the money for treatment, to live comfortably in his final months. But he refused. He said some things were more important than comfort. That wonder needed to be preserved for future generations."
Helen reached out and took Emma's hand. "I came today because I needed to see if he'd been right. If someone had really found it, really understood what he was trying to do. And looking at this museum, at how carefully you've presented his life and his vision, I know the answer. He was right. You were exactly who he was waiting for."
Emma couldn't speak. She just held the old woman's hand while tears streamed down both their faces. "He would have loved you," Helen whispered. "So much." Over the next year, Emma settled into her role as the youngest curator in American museum history. She worked closely with Dr. Mendez and the other professionals, learning everything they could teach her about preservation, authentication, exhibit design. She attended conferences on museum management, sat in on board meetings for the foundation, and slowly grew from a curious 9-year-old into a confident young woman who knew exactly what she was protecting and why it mattered. The collection continued to grow, not through new acquisitions, but through discovery. They found items Marcus had catalogued but hidden in different locations, insurance against theft or disaster. A storage unit in Portland contained 30 more vintage guitars. A safety deposit box held rare coins worth millions. Each discovery was like receiving a letter from Marcus, another piece of his carefully constructed legacy. Emma started speaking at schools, not just in Oregon but across the country, telling her story of climbing the forbidden tree and finding wonder. She talked about courage and curiosity, about the importance of preserving beauty, about how one person's dedication could change the world. Students listened with rapt attention,
many of them seeing themselves in the lonely girl who'd needed something to believe in. On the first anniversary of the museum's opening, they held a special celebration. Over 200,000 people had visited in the first year. The foundation had funded art programs in 12 schools. 3 doctoral dissertations had been written about Marcus's collection. The oak tree, once forbidden and feared, had become a symbol of possibility, its image used on the museum's logo and marketing materials. Emma stood on the stage that night, now 11 years old, but somehow older than her years, and looked out at the crowd gathered in the main gallery. She saw her grandmother, healthy and happy for the first time in years. Saw Gerald, who'd become like a grandfather to her. Saw Patricia, Richard, Dr. Mendez, Helen Carr, and hundreds of others whose lives had been touched by Marcus's gift. "A year ago," Emma said, "I climbed a tree everyone told me was dangerous. I found something hidden in its branches that changed my life and changed this town. But more than that, I found a connection to someone I never met, but who understood me better than anyone. Marcus Webb was lonely and different and misunderstood, but he was also brilliant and dedicated and full of hope. He believed the world still held magic. He believed someone would come who'd see what he saw, who'd fight to protect wonder. I was that someone, but now I'm not alone. All of you, everyone who's visited this museum, everyone who's been moved by Marcus's story, you're part of it too. You're helping protect what he built. You're proving he was right to believe." She paused, emotion catching in her throat. "People always say you can't change the world, that one person doesn't matter. But Marcus did matter, his life mattered. And if we remember that, if we keep protecting beauty and wonder and creativity, then maybe we all matter. Maybe we can all leave something behind that inspires someone else to climb, to explore, to believe in possibility." The applause was thunderous, but Emma barely heard it. She was looking at the photograph of Marcus on the wall, at his gentle eyes and quiet smile, and she could have sworn he was looking right back at her, proud and grateful and no longer alone. Years passed. Emma grew into her role, becoming a recognized expert on vintage collectibles despite her young age. She wrote articles for museum journals about preservation techniques. She consulted with other institutions on exhibit design. At 15, she gave a TED Talk that went viral, viewed over 20 million times, about the power of curiosity and the importance of protecting cultural heritage. The museum expanded twice, adding wings for rotating exhibits and educational programs. The Marcus Webb Foundation funded scholarships for students interested in museum studies, art history, and archival science. They partnered with the Library of Congress to digitize Marcus's journals, making them available to researchers worldwide. His story became part of the American cultural narrative, a tale of dedication and vision that inspired countless others to pursue their own passions, however unconventional. Rose retired from all work except volunteer teaching at the museum, spending her days sharing Marcus's story with wide-eyed children who couldn't believe a tree could hold such secrets. Gerald became the foundation's chairman, his banking expertise ensuring Marcus's legacy remained financially stable for generations. Richard devoted himself to the foundation's work, eventually selling his real estate company to focus full-time on expanding the museum's reach. But through it all, Emma never forgot the girl she'd been. Small, lonely, grieving, desperate for something to believe in. She made sure the museum remained accessible to everyone, keeping admission free for anyone under 18. She created programs specifically for children who'd lost parents, who felt invisible, who needed to remember that wonder still existed in the world, because she understood that feeling, understood how much it hurt and how much it helped to find something bigger than your pain. On Emma's 18th birthday, the foundation held a special ceremony. They unveiled a new permanent exhibit called The Climb, featuring Emma's story alongside Marcus's. It showed her old backpack from that first day, the brass key she'd found in the hollow tree, photographs of her at 9 standing in the attic surrounded by treasures, and at the center, a recreation of the moment that changed everything. A young girl pulling up a floorboard, flashlight in hand, about to discover that courage and curiosity could unlock doors to worlds undreamed. The exhibit's final panel featured a quote from Emma's own journal, written on her 10th birthday. "Marcus started this. I'm just finishing what he began. I hope that's enough. I hope I'm making him proud." Below it, someone had added a response in Marcus's handwriting, pulled from the very last page of his journal, written days before he died. "To whoever finds this, you are enough. You are more than enough. The fact that you climbed, that you looked, that you believed, that makes you extraordinary. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The world needs people like you, people who still see magic. Thank you for proving I was right to hope. Thank you for being brave." Emma stood in front of the exhibit with tears in her eyes, reading Marcus's words for the 1,000th time. She thought about that scared 9-year-old climbing a rope ladder, about the lonely man who'd built a sanctuary in a tree, about how two souls separated by death and decades had somehow found each other through wonder and preserved beauty. She thought about all the children who'd visited the museum since it opened, hundreds of thousands of them, each one learning that being different wasn't wrong, that passion mattered, that dedication could create miracles. She thought about the teenagers who'd told her the museum inspired them to pursue art or music or collecting. About the adults who'd rediscovered joy in simple things after walking through Marcus's carefully curated treasures. The treehouse still stood in the oak tree behind the house where Emma and Rose now lived permanently, the Hendersons having sold them the property at a generous price. The treehouse had been restored, made safe, and open to supervised tours. Children climbed the rope ladder every day now, no longer forbidden, no longer feared. They explored the space where Marcus had once sat planning his legacy, and they learned that dangerous often just meant misunderstood. The attic remained private, accessible only to Emma and a handful of trusted conservators. It was her sacred space, where she went when the weight of responsibility felt too heavy, when she needed to remember why any of this mattered. She'd sit in the quiet, surrounded by the pieces Marcus hadn't yet rotated into the museum, and read his journals, learning about his childhood loneliness, his teenage awkwardness, his adult isolation, seeing herself reflected in every page. One entry, written in 1957 when Marcus was just 22 years old, had become Emma's favorite. "I don't fit in this world. I've tried, God knows I've tried, but I'm too quiet, too strange, too interested in things that don't matter to normal people. I collect beautiful things because I can't create them myself. I preserve wonder because I'm afraid the world will forget it exists. Maybe that makes me foolish. Maybe that makes me sad. But when I hold a perfect comic book, or hear a vintage guitar, or look at an original painting, I feel connected to something bigger than my loneliness. I feel like I'm protecting something that matters. And maybe, just maybe, someday, someone else will find what I've protected and understand why I did it. Maybe I won't die completely alone after all." Emma always cried at that entry, because Marcus hadn't died alone. She'd found him, and she'd made sure the whole world knew his name, knew his story, knew that his life had mattered profoundly. Now, at 18, standing in the museum that bore his name, Emma understood something she hadn't at 9. This wasn't about money or valuable collectibles or even preserving cultural artifacts, though those things mattered. This was about connection, about reaching across time and death and loneliness to touch another soul, about proving that dedication and vision and belief in beauty could echo through generations. Marcus had left his legacy to someone he'd never meet, trusting the universe to send the right person. And the universe had sent a grieving 9-year-old girl who needed to feel brave, who needed to believe in wonder, who needed proof that one person's life could matter. They'd saved each other in a way. Marcus through his faith in future possibility, Emma through her courage to climb. As Emma prepared to leave for college in the fall, she'd been accepted to every museum studies program she'd applied to, but chose to stay local, unwilling to leave the collection for long. She made a final addition to the museum, a small exhibit near the entrance, easily missed if you weren't paying attention. It was a simple glass case containing 2 items, a rope from the old ladder, frayed and worn, and a child's drawing in crayon. The drawing showed a girl climbing a tree, reaching for stars hidden in its branches.
Below the image, in a 9-year-old's handwriting, "Sometimes you have to climb to find the magic." The placard beside it read, "Marcus Webb believed in wonder. Emma Davies believed in Marcus. Together they proved that courage and curiosity can unlock treasures beyond imagination. What will you believe in? What will you be brave enough to climb for?" Anyone can change their life if they're willing to climb toward wonder, to look beyond fear, to believe that magic still exists in the most unexpected places. Emma Davies had climbed a forbidden tree and found a fortune, but more than that, she'd found purpose, connection, and proof that one person's dedication could ripple across time to touch souls not yet born. She'd found Marcus Webb's legacy and made it her own. Because some treasures aren't measured in dollars. They're measured in the lives they change, the wonder they preserve, and the courage they inspire in everyone brave enough to climb. And as the sun set over Millbrook that night, casting golden light across the oak tree's branches, Emma looked up and smiled. The tree was no longer dangerous, no longer forbidden. It was a monument to possibility, to the extraordinary things that happen when curiosity defeats fear. Marcus had been right about everything. The world still held magic, and Emma had found it hidden in the hollow of an oak tree, waiting patiently for someone brave enough to believe. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that curiosity and courage can unlock the most extraordinary treasures.